Hello, everyone. Happy October Awareness Month. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education, and October we're trying to bring awareness to a bunch of different exceptionalities such as ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, dyslexia, Down syndrome, and various mental health issues. Today I have the pleasure of having Dr. Jan Hastings join me to discuss dyslexia and reading fluency. Hello, Dr. Hasbrouck, how are you?
Hi, Kathryn, I'm fine. Hello, everybody joining us too.
Why don't you take a little bit and let us know who you are and what you do.
Okay. Well, I'm Jan Hasbrouck. I live in Seattle, Washington. We're having kind of a gray, misty day here, like a lot of people think happens in Seattle all the time. At this point in my career, I work as a consultant, advisor, still dabble in research a bit. I was a reading specialist. That's how my career started. I knew always that I wanted to be a teacher and ended up working in the area of reading, and that filled my soul. I worked after that position. I actually worked as a reading coach for a while too. That was an interest of mine and an amazing opportunity. Then I worked at the University of Oregon for a while and ended up at Texas A&M University as a professor there. And then lots of adventures along the way. Ended up back on the West Coast where I grew up and raised my kids. Washington State was doing a reading initiative, so I got involved in that and traveled around quite a bit and do things with people, mostly in the U.S., but I've had some international work opportunities as well. And reading, along with coaching, but reading has been a real focus of my work and my interest, and continues to this day. And last year I wrote a book called Conquering Dyslexia. And previously to that, Deb Glazer and I wrote a book on reading fluency. I've done a number of studies on reading fluency over the past 25 years. Seems amazing, but my colleague Jerry Tyndall at the University of Oregon, he and I had some opportunities to do an initial study on oral reading fluency rates as measured by words correct per minute. We replicated that in 2006 and did probably our last replication of the study and published that in 2017. So that's sort of a recap overview of who I am, what I do.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely looking forward to reading your book. I've got a bunch on my to-read list. I'm doing Patton's book study for, the Reading Blueprint right now.
Oh, that's excellent. Yes. Uh-huh.
And yours is next on the pile of the to read. So.
Well, very good. Patton is going to also do, starting in January, a book study of my dyslexia books. So if that works out well for you, then you could just do it again in January.
Yes, sounds great. So now that we're talking about dyslexia, how do you define dyslexia?
Well, that's just very interesting. It is, I was just reading today, Julian Elliott's work I've read his book previously about the dyslexia debate, and I was reading today the article that he wrote in Reading Research Quarterly, really documenting the fact that there are still lots of disagreements about what dyslexia is. For the purposes of my book, I used the widely used and replicated definition of the International Dyslexia Association, that it is a learning disability. When we're specifically talking about dyslexia as different from those many children who have reading difficulties for other reasons, the fact that there is a neurobiological aspect of dyslexia. And I mean, there's no, Elliot says too, there's no doubt, there's absolute no question that there is a neurobiological issue. He has some interesting questions about who gets that label and who doesn't, when we can't always for sure determine that the problem is neurobiological. But it clearly is a language-based disorder. It clearly is something that children are born with, and with early identification and intervention, we can help take those young neuroplastic brains and do that powerful intervention that can help us get to the point where we can prevent all those challenges of dyslexia that so many people face. And it's just heartbreaking to know that most of those challenges are preventable if we can identify children as early as possible. We now know that can be even as early as 3 years old, 4 years old. So it's a very exciting time to be talking about dyslexia.
Yes, it is. Well, and then I think part of the confusion on the terminology is, especially before 2000, dyslexia was kind of the big heading that a lot of people were using instead of that specific learning disorder or specific learning disability. So there are people that are still confusing it with the general term instead of just the specific decoding side of the disability, whereas others will just, anything that's a learning disability is dyslexia, and that's not what we're talking about, right?
Right.
So how does dyslexia affect reading instruction?
Well, I think it's very important to understand, and I'm surprised that so many teachers are surprised to hear that dyslexia is a spectrum disorder. And I think a lot of our conversations benefit from talking about that there are, in fact, children with dyslexia who may never become evident in a classroom. They may have some mild spelling issues. They may have difficulty ever achieving that level of fluency in their reading that we would consider proficient, but they manage to be adequate readers. And then there are the more moderate level of involvement up to the most severe. And in all of those, and each of those, of course, are individual children, the instruction needs to be designed to address their particular needs. And what we're these days, and I'm sure in your conversations you're talking a lot about structured literacy. It's such a lovely shorthand way for us to talk about all the multiple components that does need to be in place for effective reading instruction. But I'm fascinated by the fact that the evidence that structured literacy works across the board. If we take our proficient readers, those children, about 5% of the population, those children who show up already reading as 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds, some miracle, mystical way, and then the other children who are going to learn to read, write, and spell fairly easily. When we use structured literacy with those children, they do even better. They do well pretty much no matter what we do. But structured literacy is essential for our children who do struggle with reading, particularly our children with dyslexia. So paying attention to a systematically designed scope and sequence, knowing where we have to spend a lot more time than with most children, the explicit instructional techniques that allow us to make it clear to these children what it is that we want their brain to do, their mouth to do, and give them all the time necessary and the level of intensity, the multimodality that will vary in the intensity, the amount of focus that children need depending on their level of involvement with dyslexia and all those other factors that play a role in our children's learning.
For sure. So when it comes to word reading, it would be really helpful, I think, if we explain what exactly it means to go from sounding out a word and decoding the word to moving it into our sight vocabulary. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. Well, it is a multi-factor component. The science that we are understanding, the growing body of knowledge we have about the brain, and so many like Marianne Wolf and others have reminded us that our brains have not evolved to the point where reading is a natural task. So we have multiple processors and multiple components in the brain that all have to be working together. And what we know in the dyslexic brain is that the auditory processing that processes the language, speech sounds, just doesn't work as well. And again, from mild to moderate to severe, have difficulty there. But we have to help those brains connect the visual system, the auditory system, the meaning system together as we are activating initially the sounds and the words with the repetition that will be necessary. But we certainly have learned a lot about how to get those words permanently embedded in the brain, what we've all called as a reading teacher all those decades ago when I was taught about teaching children sight words. We were using that term a lot to mean irregular words or high frequency words, and the wisdom back then was there's only one way to get those words in the children's brain. That is put them on a flashcard and look at those flashcards over and over and over. And we now know that there are many more thoughtful ways. The flashcard is really primarily depending on two systems, the visual system and just the long-term memory of the children, and we can activate both of those things a lot more efficiently by approaching it from the meaning of the word, the sound components of the word, and there will be those children who look at it, hear it, look at it, are told what the word is, practice it maybe one or two times, and it is permanently mapped as a sight word. For our children with dyslexia, it doesn't happen that quickly. So all of those individual components, the letter knowledge, the sound knowledge, lots and lots of modeling of how to process those sounds, the blending and the segmenting, and doing that with increasing confidence, accuracy, and the rate aspect has to be layered on for our students. But that foundation of accuracy at the letter level, the sound level, and the word level is very important. It's going to take, for some children, an enormous amount of time, and that we have to work so hard to make sure that they invest the amount of time they need, and keep them encouraged, because it's a process.
Definitely. Now, do you have any strategies for those students that it seems like no matter how many times they have that exposure to the word, they're just struggling and getting it from that ability to have to decode it every time into that sight vocabulary?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, it is repetition. It's going to be very few repetitions for some children, and it could literally be hundreds of repetitions for other children. And if we, again, get our act together and find these children as quickly and as young as possible, we need to be paying attention to the fact that well, for all learners too, that distributed practice over time is just simply more effective for all human learners than one time of cumulative practice. I mean, we can use the analogy of learning to play the piano. If you're taking lessons and your piano teacher says, before you come back next week, I want you to practice an hour. The human brain just will respond better in that and every other similar kind of situation, where it would be much better to take that 1 hour and break it into 10-minute segments over 6 days than, oh my word, I have a piano lesson tomorrow, I better sit down and do my 1 hour of practice. Especially, and we can use that idea too with young children. In learning words and learning sounds and learning letters and learning words and learning phrases, reading is short, intensive, engaging, get some physical movement in there, make it as game-like as possible, do a little bit of it, and then when their brains are starting to lose the focus and attention, we move to something else, but we come back. And we come back over and over and over, and we enlist the help of parents to do that reinforcement, older siblings, tutors if available. But those repetitions are not, okay, we're going to sit in this corner for the next 2 hours and we're going to learn these words. That can't happen. It is defeating and demoralizing to children. There are ways we can take all of these activities and make them almost feel like games and have a lot of fun with them, but get that repetition in 2 to 3 times for some children, 5 to 10 for some children, 200 to 300 or more for other children. And we've got to go in with it knowing that it's that amount of practice is going to be necessary. Our job is to get it done and to keep the kids engaged and not feeling defeated at any time.
Yes, of course. That's definitely important. And then, so today we're going to focus on reading fluency. And what is it that reading fluency really means?
Well, when Deb Glazer and I wrote our book on fluency, we were really focusing on text fluency and used the definition, the common 3-part definition of accuracy, rate, and expression. We very carefully and explained why we put accuracy first, which is in our definition different from the National Reading Panel 20 years ago, where they talked about reading fluency as reading quickly, accurately, and with good expression. Accuracy is the foundation of reading, so we put that first. But that definition even applies to the learning of the underlying components of fluency. We can't get to text fluency until we have word fluency, and we can't get to word fluency until we have fluency being accuracy and rate. The prosody or expression only really comes in when we're reading connected text, but the accuracy and rate are relevant at the sound and letter level as well as the word level. And so that goes back to the discussion we were just having of the numbers of repetitions that we need to be prepared to do for some of our children. And then all the scaffolding components as well, the making sure that they understand the articulation and how how they form those letters and sounds and all of those things. But fluency is the ability to read ultimately connected, meaningful text, but to decode and make meaning of text with reasonable accuracy, appropriate rate, and ultimately expression that mirrors spoken language.
Right, and that's something that you can't do if you're having to stop and decode every word that you come across. You need to have that sight vocabulary to tap onto, so you're not focusing on decoding each word letter by letter and struggling to connect the meaning of these words. And so when we talk about reading levels, we talk about the instructional level, the independent level, and the frustration level. Do you want to just take a minute tell a little bit about each of these levels and how an individual can approach fluency at these levels?
Yeah. Yes, I'd be happy to do that. And those levels are getting quite a bit of scrutiny these days. Those are the levels. We've used those labels to level text for many decades now, starting around in the 1930s, where it was presented almost as if this were scientific knowledge and incorporated into almost every reading textbook that teachers need to know this, reading specialists need to know how to precisely define a child's independent instructional and frustration level, because as is obvious in those words, that you should never have children reading at their frustration level because they would be frustrated, that you must find that individual child's instructional level because that's the only place where instruction is valuable. We've learned a lot since then. We've learned that, first of all, there never was any science behind those levels at all, but they are intuitively and logically helpful for us to think about the different difficulty levels that each child has with text. And there will be text for most children that is easy, and we can call that their independent level. Instructional level, which we hope and is probably true for most children, is that range of text that we would call appropriate for their grade level, third graders being instructional at third grade level text. It's hard for me to even talk about that because as a research scientist, I want to be precise and talk about things that have been well defined, and those haven't. But I was a reading specialist first, and I'm a parent and a grandparent, and I know that if we're understanding that those are rather vague terms about, but they have some relevance in a discussion about helping students acquire skillful, fluent reading. And I think it's a good discussion for us to have, because I think that the general belief still for teachers is that children are going to become fluent readers if we give them ample opportunity to read independently by themselves in easy text or independent text. And what we have found is that probably is true for our children, our neurotypical children, or children who are on grade level, that once they've reached a certain level of proficiency in reading, they do in fact get better by reading. But we also know there's some interesting studies that say even those kids who are on level, neurotypical kids who are on level, benefit from struggling with text a little bit, giving them some hard text, maybe not to work independently, but instruction in frustration level text. So for our students with dyslexia who struggle with so many aspects of reading, we want to be sure that we don't, their reading is in general, inherently a frustrating task. We don't want to make them more frustrated. However, there is research, and some of the research that I've conducted shows real power in thoughtful, systematic, explicit instruction in frustration level text, giving those students text that is very difficult, would be nearly impossible for them to read on their own. So we're not talking about this doing it on their own, but teaching them the words in the text, giving them ample opportunity to practice the words in those texts, and giving them a lot of motivation to work hard on those texts. We have found that can be particularly beneficial to children to boost, in a meaningful way, boost their fluency, because they are increasing their sight word vocabulary. They are getting lots of experience in rereading text. They have to do it because it's too hard at the beginning, so they have to read it multiple times. So there's advantage and utility for kids at all three of those levels. Frustration level only with a teacher's involvement.
Right. So as a teacher, if you're wanting to work on your students' reading fluency, what type, I remember, the rule of five. If you read a page and come across 5 words that are too difficult for you, maybe it's not the best one for you to work on. Is there some sort of guidance that you can give teachers to help them choose the right level of text for their student to work on independently, to work on that fluency?
Yeah. Well, again, I have great caution in having our children spend too much time reading independently if they are struggling, because we all know those children, well, there's many things that children will do when we ask them to read independently. If they're not doing well, they'll either not do it, or they may try and stay with a text that really is too hard. Without any guidance, they may be, classically seeing the word was and calling it saw, and reading the word before and calling it because, and just imprinting those words incorrectly. So we need to be cautious. But most children like to read independently. We need to be sure that they're accessing books that they enjoy, that are meaningful to them, engaging to them. I think all of us have had the experience of reading texts that somebody would find very difficult, others would find it very difficult, except we're very motivated to read it. But I would just say I want to emphasize that the precious time we have with our struggling readers, our dyslexic readers, most of that time, whenever possible, should be engaged with instruction and oral reading, so that we can make those corrections and continue to make it as engaging and fun. Having kids read in pairs and partners that are appropriately partnered together. Lots of ways to just really magnify or underscore, maximize, I guess the words I'm looking for, maximize their instructional time.
Right, and provide them with that structured support and modeling for how to attack those words.
Yes.
That they're struggling with. So once you've found a text that's at an appropriate level that the child can read independently, it may be one that's lower than their grade level, but it's at a skill that they can do. How would you suggest building fluency?
Well, let's go back to the definition. The definition of fluency is accuracy. So one of the first things that I would do is make sure that the student can read all the words. And we also know that fluency, all aspects of reading are supported by having children, having any reader understand the meaning of the words, triggering the language that's already in our brain. So if there are vocabulary words that would get in the way of not being able to understand the text, so making sure that they know what key words are, the meaning of those words, so they can access the meaning as they're reading, that they can decode, first with your help and support, all the key words, all the main words in the story. So laying that accuracy foundation first. And then the rate piece is really, that takes practice. There's really no way around it. And there are discussions these days in the research community of the varying benefits of repeated reading, where the children read perhaps a short-ish bit of text over and over and over, or take that same amount of time and reading widely, doing a lot of reading, as long as that accuracy piece is in place, and we can be there to correct and motivate and inspire them to keep reading. So it's those two key components when we're building fluency. Make sure the accuracy is there. It doesn't have to be perfect. In our definition, we talk about reasonably accurate at an appropriate rate. So most of the words, the key words, knowing the meaning of the words, and then opportunity for practice. And oral practice, the evidence is quite clear that oral practice is probably more beneficial for building fluency for a variety of reasons.
Right. And then at least one caution that I've always felt worth mentioning is understanding the students' struggles and knowing that some of the dyslexics or some individuals have memory as a strength. Mm-hmm. So those repeated readings, especially when it's modeled, can just be the student learning to recite and not actually look at the text and read the words. And that's where I struggle with, the home reading programs that send home, those predictable texts. Those ones are so easy to memorize.
Yes.
And, use the pictures as not the strategies that we're wanting to enforce in our struggling readers, our dyslexic readers. We want them to actually do the word attack and, use the decodable text. But if they're being sent home with these predictable texts, it's easy for them to learn, and they practice them in school in a choral reading environment and the repeated reading. So they've memorized them. You're taking away that element to allow them to truly learn those words and develop the fluency.
That's a very good point. It also can give the parents a little false sense of how well their children are actually doing. So they may feel everything's fine until they get perhaps the end of second grade into third grade, and suddenly those predictable texts don't exist anymore, and suddenly their child is not reading as well. That's a very good point, Kathryn.
Right. And then ways that you can help support reading fluency. Like if you're working with a decodable text, most decodable texts have 90 to 95% of the words so that the child can decode the words based on the skills that they have. Would
Yes.
you recommend reviewing or pre-teaching the words that they're going to come across within the text they don't have the skills to decode beforehand?
If we don't want guessing. We don't want guessing. So that would be an individual decision as an instructor. If I were tutoring a child, if they have a habit, if they've learned to try to guess, or they have lack of confidence in their decoding skills, I might pre-teach some of the words. I might go through and look at words that I anticipate will be difficult for them, and we'll go over those together. If they reach that point where I want all children to be, that they have confidence in their decoding skills, I think a little bit of purposeful struggle can be very good if I'm there to support them. So we may read it a few times, as slowly as necessary, and I can, if it's so slow it's not meaningful at the end of the phrase, then I can reread the phrase. They get through the dog is big. Then when they're done, yes, that's right, you just read the dog is big. That's wonderful. Let's read on and see if we can find out how big the dog is. So doing that auditory support for them, modeling, as you've used that term several times, modeling what the fluent reading sounds like, and then going back and reading it a couple of times, and being very overt to the children, very clear with them. That I just can imagine myself now working with a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old who just read "The dog is big," and I want them to feel proud that they're very successful. But I also might say to them, you just read that sentence with absolute perfect accuracy. Now let's see if we can go back and read it with at a little bit faster rate. A little bit faster rate. Make it more sound like you're speaking. Model that for them and see if they can do it. So I think it is definitely a scaffold. We start with the accuracy, we build some rate, we continue to move on in that way. So lots and lots of practice, lots of scaffolding, lots and lots of encouragement along the way.
Right. And at what stage do you think it is important to highlight what the different punctuation marks mean and have to do with when they're reading the sentences and influencing their expression?
Yeah. Well, I think right from the beginning, I think a very beginning reader, even our children with dyslexia, especially if we really help them understand that what they're reading in print is mirroring our talk, that speech to print idea, and keeping that very overt to them. If they were an example I use often in my trainings is the word mug. If they have been pre-taught that M is and U is and they know the G sound for G, we can decode the word mug. But before I put those letters up, I'm going to talk to them. We're going to say, we're going to read a word, mug. Say the word, mug. Say, what sounds do you hear in mug? And then I might, hopefully I would have a mug available to show them, and this is what a mug is. And then we would work on decoding the word. So I think keeping all those things in mind as we're doing this. But I think also just at that very beginning stage, using exclamation, that's one of the funnest ones to teach for really young kids, especially if their language is strong, which many of our children with dyslexia have very strong language. We can have a lot of fun with the exclamation mark, just like, and the question mark and the period. I think very young children at the very beginning stages of reading, we can start pointing those out. Things like the quotation marks, that might come a little bit later, and probably that very early decodable text doesn't have a lot of quotation marks in it. But I mean, you've heard me talk about fun a lot. I know these kids struggle so much, but there's so much fun that we can have along the way. And I think periods, stopping and making a big deal about the stopping, exclamation and question marks, we can have a lot of fun teaching those, and then looking for them. Oh, look, do you see any question marks in this story? Do you see any exclamation marks? Just drawing their attention to it, because it helps them draw their attention to the meaning. It helps them make it sound more like speech, and all those things are going to help with the memory and laying the foundation of those words in their orthographic lexicon, their sight word vocabulary.
Definitely. And I've even gotten the Eat, Shoots, and Leaves children's book.
Oh,
And,
I didn't know there was one.
Oh, you have to get it. So it has a couple sentences.
I love that book.
And then it has the pictures, and how the pictures are different based on the punctuation.
Oh.
And so you can see someone like twirling on the slide, and then they're twirling the slide in their hands like a lasso, right? So I found that as a really great way. You know, you see the panda who eats, shoots, and leaves.
Yes.
And yeah, so they see these, and that actually how we say it and paying attention to them in the text changes the meaning of what we're trying to convey.
Yes, and I can just see so many kids having a great deal of fun with that idea.
Well, and then getting them to create their own sentences.
Yes.
Right? That can
Yes.
have the different meanings, and talking about the puns, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then do you ever, like, I know in a couple of my lessons, I'm fortunate in the fact that my brother is a news broadcaster. And I brought him into my classroom, and because my students weren't the best at, reading expressively, and it was really, that monotone pace, even though they didn't need to read like that. And then I got him to really liven up. So if I read the news like this, no one would listen. And, he had spent time on radio, and it really helped him engage more into it, and, talking about it and doing the lips practicing and that sort of thing. So what are do you have any like go-to ways to work on fluency for kids with dyslexia that aren't those redundant ones? Any games or activities that you can think of?
Well, anything that gets them doing that level of repetition. And I know that there's a lot of positive encouragement about the use of readers theater. I'm just cautious because I've seen readers theater be used, especially in a homogeneous class or a heterogeneous classroom. We've got some really good readers and some kids who are really struggling. The kids who usually end up doing most of the reading in readers theater, the kids who are already pretty good at it. So I think we need to I do want things to be fun. I do want to find appropriate activities, but for our students who are behind, they have to be very purposeful and very meaningful. And balancing that with something like fun. I certainly would never banish readers theater because it can be a lot of fun for children. But if people think, oh yeah, we're covering fluency in my classroom because we do a lot of readers theater, and I'm not sure how well that would work these days while so many classrooms are virtual anyway. But the strategy that I find the most valuable is actually that I recommend a lot is associated with a commercial product, and that is Read Naturally. And and I always want to emphasize, I have no affiliation with that company, although I've trained in their products for a number of years. So there's no financial concern I have in recommending that their products are wonderful, but it's really the strategy that is free and can be used with any products, which is highly motivating to children, where we give them a piece of difficult text to have them do a cold, unpracticed read for 60 seconds, write down that score, and then give them that layered accuracy and rate practice so that they build their proficiency in reading it. Then after multiple practices, have them read it again and compare their now practice score with the original cold read score. And many children find that very motivating, and they're willing to tackle a new piece of text because they've seen themselves improve. They've felt themselves go from, I could barely read that passage, to now I can read it, I can understand it, I can answer questions about it. So I think that can be both fun and very meaningful and effective for our students. And so that would be something like that would always be my go-to activity for instructional time.
Right. And then for parents at home, do you have any advice to help them?
Whatever your child is willing to do, and these days I know that they're, everything seems so topsy-turvy, but I think it's very important for anything that parents do at home that it's fairly easy for them to do it with their students. That I don't want to ask parents to take on anything that's going to cause a battle or the kids just giving up or feeling overwhelmed. That's has no beneficial purpose for the student or the parent. So finding some piece of text that may be well beyond what your child can read and reading it to them and having discussions about it. Keep them connected to the wonderful aspects of reading, the wonders of reading, so that they know that someday maybe I can read Harry Potter to myself, or whatever the book may be. I think that's we don't have ever enough time in classrooms to do just that kind of wonderful, meaningful, inspirational reading to kids. So if parents can and are willing to do that, I think that's fabulous, especially if they can take some time to talk about what they're reading. Why do you think that just happened? What do you think is going to happen next? And if you were the author, would you change this? All of those things may not feel like they're helping children's reading, but they can make a big effect. And if there's activities that the teachers want the child to do some extra practice with, reading some words or playing some word activity, writing words on a whiteboard or something like that. If the child is willing to do that and does it easily at home, and the parents have the time and interest in doing that, that can be wonderful too. But I'll go back. I don't want to ask parents to do anything that pushes their child over the edge and makes reading a punishing or difficult task.
And that's important to mention, because reading is a challenging thing, and your children don't want you to see them struggle. Yeah. They want you to think the best of them, and not every parent-child relationship is right for the parent taking that role on as a teacher. And it's more important for you to be the parent that they can love and trust than to be the parent that they get frustrated and angry with, because that's only going to cause damage long term. Great. So do you have time for a couple questions from people that are listening? If they have any to type, there's a little bit of lag on the Facebook side, so it might take a couple minutes. Or if any of our listeners on Zoom have any questions, we'd be happy to take them now. And as we finish up, we will get off of Facebook and close the room, but I'd like to talk to you for a couple of minutes afterwards, if that's all right.
Okay.
And As of now, I'm not seeing any questions. So thank you very much, Dr. Hasbrouck. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope everybody else has too. You will be able to watch this conversation on replay on the Garforth Education Facebook page. And within the next couple of days, I will be getting it available on YouTube for those of you who would like to watch it again.
Very good.